written 4 books, including Explaining Postmodernism, Skepticism, and Socialism from Rousseau to Foucault, and Nietzsche, and the Nazis. We all give a big round of applause for Steve Hicks.
Thank you, Abby. How's that? All right, I'm going to be talking on this theme. I'm going to make 3 points today, but I'm thinking demographically. When we talk about socialism, there's lots of socialisms. People come to socialism at different points in their life and for different reasons. So I'm going to be focusing on young, mostly students who are at universities. These are the people with whom I spend a lot of time. And it's an important demographic because most people form their deep philosophy of life at that stage. They're intellectually mature, they're exploring lots of ideas, and they latch onto something, and that becomes foundation believing. Almost all young socialists, in my experience, are 75% libertarian. They are already on our side, for the most part, on most issues. So when we think about the free society, it's not just about money and economics. We're thinking about our love lives. We're thinking about religion. We're thinking about our family lives. We're thinking about our artistic pursuits. And when we say we want a free society, we want freedom in all of those areas to put together our own conception of the meaningful life and to be able to have the freedom of action to go forth and try to make it happen in our lives. And when you talk to self-described young people who will use the label socialism, and it's often an undefined or a moving target, right, what they mean by that, and you start talking through the kinds of issues. So we'll go, for example, first to sex. Now we say socialism, we, right? What that means to us is some sort of central planning. Everybody gets a say in what everybody does. You do things for the good of the community, not for yourself. Everything that we have, we should share it with each other. There shouldn't be any privacy or private property. It's okay, fine. But suppose we take all of those themes and we start talking with young people who call themselves socialism about sex. And we say, does this mean that you see yourself as communal property when it comes to sex? That we should have elections about who gets to sleep with whom, right? How many children they should have, where you should go, and how much you can spend. And they say, no, absolutely not, right? I'm not afraid. Instead, what they want is what we all want in our sex and romance lives is, hey, it's my life, I will call the shots, and we'll have voluntary, mutually beneficial interactions. Right? So they're on board with us on that. If you talk about aesthetic issues and art, right, and many of them think of themselves as creative people, they want to have creative careers as designers or artists who work in the new industry and so on. Do we think as socialism that means in the artistic sphere of our lives, we should vote on what movies we are allowed to watch, what books we're allowed to read, and if you're a creative person, you should be only producing for the good of the state, and there should be central organization of artists and designers and all pulling for a common message. And it's absolutely not. No, I'm not in favor of any of that. I'm in favor of artistic, creative freedom. Everybody should be able to make whatever art they want, consume whatever art they want, and so forth. And again, that's our theme, so they're on board with that. When you go through other spheres of life, religious life, they don't believe in centralized authority and so forth, and religion should only be for state purposes and so on. So that's my first point, that there is a lot of common ground among young socialists, even as they're self-described, that whether they have identified themselves or not, they still are individualistic, freedom-loving people in a lot of areas. But we do have the outlier, because as soon as we start talking about money, business, the economy, then of course, that's what the socialism means to them, and they do start to operate on very different principles and find very different arguments appealing to them. So in that respect, the socialism, the economic socialism, is an outlier in their way of thinking. Now this is where we start to get very puzzled, right, from our side of the political perspective, because when we start to think about the case for socialism and freedom and capitalism and markets and so on, what we start to do, and we do this very well, and we do it very well because we've been working hard at it, and we do have the facts and the data on our side, is we start to come out with number crunching, data gathering exercises to show the economic superiority of free markets over any sort of socialism. Terrible track record of socialism, the great track record of free markets capitalism, or whatever you want to call it. So we put together beautiful charts like this. I didn't make this one. I ripped it off from the Gapminder site. It's a Swedish think tank, but they have beautiful graphics that we can use and play around with them. This is every country in the world represented by a circle. Big circle, big population, small circle, small population, color-coded by parts of the world. So the Asian countries are in red. The blue countries are African nations. The yellowish countries, those are European nations. And the Americas are the green. This is plotted, so there's like 180 something countries all represented here. The horizontal axis is income from 0, 1,000, and then it starts to double. This is 2,000, 4,000, 8,000, 16, 32, 64. So we don't have to have this chart be wrapping around the wall to capture everyone. The vertical axis is representing health. And the proxy for health in this case is life expectancy at birth. And so what we see is, we'll plot every single country in the world, data that we love from our perspective. So what we find is that there's a trend line here. Poor countries, people don't live very long. So life here is marked by not very much income, and that means not very much consumption, and also people don't live very long. On average, so your Central African Republic, for example, is about 53 years life expectancy, and income is perhaps $300 or $400 per person. And the trend line goes up to the rich countries in the world, and there we are. I'm from Canada originally, so we always have to find Canada. There's Canada, there it is, right up there, partially obscured. Canada and the US always track right on each other. But what we find is, again, a beautiful correlation. The richer you are, the longer you live. That makes perfectly good sense. And then we make our case, well, why did the rich countries become rich? Right? Why did they become able to live a whole lot longer? We say, well, it's because they do a lot of science, they do a lot of research. We've got all of this engineering and technology, and all of that takes a huge amount of money, but it also takes a lot of intellectual freedom for the scientists and the engineers and so forth to do so. So freedom explains why the richer countries become rich, and if you look at the countries that are up there, it's all the Western European countries and the countries that were largely part of the British, early British colonies, Australia, Canada, the United States, and so forth. Japan after World War II, they got for economic freedom, they became rich, and people started to live a whole lot longer. And so that's the story that we like to tell. And then we like to do more pointed comparisons. We say, well, compare here. East Germany and West Germany. That doesn't really resonate with this generation's students, history, education issue there. Compare the Soviet Union with the United States in the Cold War. Also doesn't resonate right too well. So we come up with contemporary examples. We say, look at North Korea and South Korea. Right? I imagine we've all seen the map where North Korea is dark. Or compare Cubans in Cuba, right, with Cubans in Miami. Cubans in Miami doing awesomely, Cubans in Cuba not so much. Look at Venezuelans in Venezuela, Venezuelans elsewhere, and so forth. My current favorite example of that one is to compare these two landlocked South African countries, Zimbabwe and Botswana. So we can get ethnic diversity, examples from all over the world, whichever ones you want to compare. Now, Zimbabwe and Botswana share basically the same history for thousands and thousands of years. Same natural resources. Actually, Zimbabwe is better in terms of natural resources. Kalahari Desert occupies a huge chunk of Botswana. Same mix of ethnicities, religion, and so forth, right down the line. Basically, they are the same. But when we look at the data, go back to this chart here, you can see my contributions to the graphics here. My philosophy, art skills, really in action. This is Zimbabwe. And if you drop down here, that's average income of about $1,800 per person. This is Botswana. If you drop down here, average income is about $17,000 per person. That then is to say, everything is the same except for some strange reason, the Botswanans are 10 times as rich as the Zimbabweans. why is that? If you're interested in living for a longer time, average life expectancy is right at 60 for Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is one of 2 countries in the world that had declining overall life expectancy during the 20th century. The other country was Russia, under the Soviet Union, and largely for the same sorts of reasons. By contrast, same ethnicity, right, and so forth, Botswanans get about 7 additional years of life. That's significant. Well, what's the difference between these 2 countries? Well, as it turns out, right, both of them are former British colonies, both of them achieved independence at roughly the same time, but they made very different decisions at the point of independence. Basically, the Botswanans said, okay, the British are going to go away now, that's fine, we're our own country, but we're basically going to keep doing everything the way the British did. So they retained the British legal system, the common law system, British form of government, British form of education, this, that, and the other thing, and kept themselves open to trade with the rest of the world. Of course, that's a very British thing to do, right, in the modern world. The Zimbabweans, by contrast, they said, we're going to declare independence from the British, get out of here, you Britons, and what we're going to do is we're going to, in fact, import a new, or different rather, European system. We're going to import Marxism. And so from Germany, we're going to have a revolution in that name, or we're going to change all of the institutions in that particular direction. And so we have almost beautiful social science experiment. Now, we love the data, we love the arguments, we love the history, we love the economic analysis because it's on our side. And we then become very bewildered because when we start trotting out this sort of data with young socialists, it doesn't make much of a dent. And that then indicates that something else is going on psychologically. They are in their heart of hearts in many areas willing to consider arguments for freedom, but when it comes to economic issues, money issues, and business, somehow the thinking changes. And what seems like natural arguments that we make, it's a slam dunk, right? We won the debate. It's not over for the socialists. You remember to point over here. So we make the argument for the free society. In the last generation or so, we say the foundation of a free society and its economic engine really is the entrepreneurial spirit. So we're all gung-ho about the entrepreneurial spirit. And I hope you got my Wall Street Journal piece. I'm very much in that category as well. I love entrepreneurship and what it stands for. But again, when we start talking with young socialists about entrepreneurship as the heart and soul of a free society, it doesn't quite click. They've heard of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, right, and others, and they'll have a kind of cool appreciation for them. But something else is going on. So I want to just give you some anecdotes from my years of teaching young students about entrepreneurs and their implications for a free society. And we'll talk about, say, Apple. And until his death a few years ago, everybody had heard of Steve Jobs, and he was like the prototypical entrepreneur for the world. A few years ago, there was a tax issue. Apple Computer had become extraordinarily successful, and it had been extraordinarily successful overseas, and it turns out that it had $85 billion, I think the amount of money was, in offshore accounts that it was not going to bring back into the United States. So it earned all of this money from its overseas operations, and it was not going to bring it back into the United States because it would be hit by a huge tax bill, and so forth. So I'm talking about this issue with my students, and students who are in the more self-described social, they have no problem with understanding, yes, Steve Jobs is a great entrepreneur at Apple, makes these sexy products, and so forth, but they are outraged that Apple is keeping its money out of the United States, and that they have an obligation to bring that money back to the United States to pay their fair share of taxes, and it's a scandal that Apple is acting the way that it is. So what's going on there? Well, there's a kind of, well, nationalism or collectivism. Apple's an American company, and so in some sense we all own it, and so the assets that belong to Apple, we all have a claim on them. Something like that is going on. That's completely independent of them understanding the role of entrepreneurship and even being able to have a cool appreciation of the business success that Apple is involved in. So that's one anecdote that struck me. I remember that class discussion, and I had a couple like it, very distinctly. Bill Gates, everybody has heard of Bill Gates and the Microsoft empire that was built up. Again, a great entrepreneurial story. We have, of course, arguments about whether everything that Microsoft did was kosher. Sometimes big business is rough, right, and so forth, but by and large, whatever they did to create those uncounted billions and trillions of dollars worth of value, that's a great entrepreneurial story. And Bill Gates then becomes the richer man. But then people will admire Bill Gates, but if you ask them, what do you admire Bill Gates for? And there's a very clear divide, right, between those who say, I want to be like Bill Gates because he really was a nerd, he loved computers, and that's what it's about. Find the thing that you are passionate about in your life, become really good at it, throw yourself into it, and then hopefully get the huge material rewards. And that's what Bill Gates means to me, and that's why I think he's a great guy. He built Microsoft. He's a maker par excellence, right? And we need more people like him. Others will say Bill Gates really is a good guy, but they're completely cool with respect to the issue of what he did with Microsoft. What they are admiring Bill Gates for is he has all these billions of dollars and he's not spending them on himself. Well, he is spending a lot of them on himself, but a huge amount of his fortune, what he's doing is he's giving it away to other people. And we might agree or not with the various things that he is giving his money away to, but the point is that he gets credit and should be admired not so much for him being an entrepreneur, but for being a philanthropist. And so the different moral lens that is coming to the fore in thinking about this businessman in particular. Now the flip side of that is a couple of years earlier, Malcolm Forbes, the guy at Forbes magazine, was getting older, and he had lots and lots of money, and he was having one of his birthdays. I can't remember, 78 or 80 or something like that. And what he decided to do is he's going to throw a huge party to celebrate his birthday. I think the party was going to be held in Morocco. So basically, he rented out this whole resort in Morocco, a beautiful place in the Atlas Mountains, and flew in from all over the world, 500 of his friends or something like this. And they basically had a 3-day party, right, for his birthday. And so I remember talking with my students, intentionally raising this in class, and some students are saying, hey, that's fine, that's great. Birthday is a big deal, you're getting older, he made a lot of money, he should spend his money enjoying his life with his friends wherever he wants, that's what it's all about. But there's a significant subsection of students who think of themselves as left-leaning and socialist, and what their reaction to this will be is to say, that is obscene, right? That is scandalous. He has all of this money, and he is spending all of this money on himself, when there's all of these other people who don't have enough money out there. Why doesn't he give that money to the other people, and he should not be spending it on himself? And again, you can point out, well, actually, all of that money that he is spending does go to other people, right, in the economy, with people who work for it, the resort, the airlines, right, and so forth. And then they would come back, will be, say, well, those people aren't especially needy compared to other people. And what we should not be doing is caring about the people who already are basically okay. Our efforts should be focused elsewhere. That then is to say, they can understand entrepreneurship. They can understand that free markets might be overall productive, but the moral evaluation they put on those facts is quite different. How they think about Steve Jobs, Apple's billions, Bill Gates, and what we admire Malcolm Forbes and being able to celebrate his life how he wants, that's what's on their mind. So I'm taking to heart John Stuart Mill, his point about intellectual preparation. When we are educated people, and particularly if we're going to become advocates of any sort, there's a lot of stuff obviously that we have to learn. We have to learn our own position. The argument for a free society is very complicated: economics, politics, history, philosophy, right, and so forth. But your education is only half done if you understand only your own position and your arguments, even if you understand them well and they are your arguments. Intellectual preparation requires that you understand where your intellectual adversaries are coming from. You're able to get inside their position and see the world as they see it, and then be able to point out what's wrong with that. So I think it's true that a lot of socialists are screaming collectivists, want to be dictators and so forth. But there are other socialist demographics, but the ones that I am spending most of my time with, younger socialists, they're not in that category. And so the important thing is, how do we see how they're thinking about the world? They are libertarian, but not when it comes to economics, business, and money. There's a different moral framework that they are bringing to bear at that point. That's what we need to think about. What is that moral framework that they are using? So, let's take AOC and take her serious. So here's the quotation. What does socialism mean to her, representative of the younger generation? To me, what socialism means is to guarantee a basic level of dignity. Correct. Direct quote. And I think she's sincere in that. But what are the important words in that? I think there are two. One of the words is the word guarantee. The other is dignity. And what AOC is saying is, foundationally, certain things in life should be guaranteed. There's a certain baseline of security. And those are two important values. Security, guarantee, and we're talking about risk, possibility of failure, lack of success, and so forth. So what should our attitudes be toward risk in life? That's a value judgment that we need to talk about. Now, when we, on our side of the debate, say, what are we talking about? There are no guarantees in life. And in fact, risk is part and parcel of it, but the healthy, again, that's a normative term, the healthy thing to do with risk is to embrace risk, be risk tolerant, like entrepreneurs are risk tolerant. So risk is a good thing, and we're willing to embrace it. Life is an adventure. Put yourself out there, and of course you might fail. There are no guarantees. But we have a very different value framework that is being announced here, that is to say, no, risk on certain things is unacceptable, and we need a guarantee. That's a moral issue that's not going to be settled by economic debates back and forth. The other issue, second, I think, important word here, is the word dignity. That's an important one. What does she mean by dignity? And in this package, it seems to be that human dignity is something that we all have, but you get your dignity from other people providing stuff to you. And that is how your baseline of dignity is going to be achieved. Is that true? Because we typically argue the other way. There might be a baseline of respect, you're a human being, fine, but dignity has to be earned by your efforts. It can't be given to you. And that needs to be sorted out, because we have now a very fundamental value difference between us and them. Now, she's young, and we might say, oh, well, you know, she's not really philosophically literate, but I would just point out, this is Professor Michael Harrington, publishing a piece in 1988. AOC was born in 1989. There's a direct lineage, right, from Professor Michael Harrington, the most famous democratic socialist in America at that time. Young people, you can look it up if you haven't heard his name. But notice what he says here. The basic necessities of life, food, shelter, clothing, education, medical care, are met in my utopia. The utopia is going to be a socialist utopia. I don't care if they, that is to say the recipients, are lazy, promiscuous, irreverent, rotten people. It has nothing to do with your character. Everybody, even the worst of the worst people, deserve by right to have the basic stuff supplied to them. No one should have to go hungry or cold, sorry for the typo, scoundrel or not. It is completely independent of what you think your views on human nature are. So the point is, we can dismiss some people as not educated, she's a politician, past bartender, what does she know, but this is a famous professor, and this is a direct lineage. It's a moral issue that we need to address here. All right, so the themes that are being announced are security, and where does self-respect come from? That's what we need to be thinking about and pushing back on. Second theme, how young people are thinking about business, success, money, wealth, and so on. The theme of corruption is huge. Right? We get burned up by all of the corruption, the cronyism, right, and so forth. It's another thing that we share with most young people on the left. We're morally outraged by it. They are morally outraged by it. But of course, we put different interpretations on the source of the corruption and what causes it. And the arguments that we get here are about power and corruption and abuses of power. And again, these are moral things. The way they think about it is capitalism and free markets. It's about greed. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to make a lot of money. Cutting corners, trampling on other people. When you get all of that money, you go for the really big guns when it comes to power, and that's government. You buy the politicians, you become a politician. There's a revolving door between successful capitalists and successful people in government. People who go into government, they line their pockets and so forth, and it's just a big greed and money-driven corruption machine. And we resonate with a lot of that. But of course, what they're putting it is on the primary problem is the pursuit of power, the pursuit of wealth, the pursuit of greed, and they hear us saying those are good things. And for them, those are not good things. They need to be restrained in various ways. Corruption is the fault primarily with the market, because that's where all the wealth comes from, and that the market, to the extent it's free, generates rich people who then corrupt the political process. All right. I like to tell this story with my class there. Marilyn Vos-Savant is the person who, I think there was actually a young woman who beat her, but who tested highest on IQ test ever in the history of IQ tests. Brilliant woman. She wrote a column in which people would send in brain puzzles and hard logic puzzles to her, and she would write up her answer to it, and it was a very popular type of puzzle. But the one that I like telling is one where this guy wrote into her saying that he and his wife and his brother-in-law had this after-dinner debate about a math problem. And they had 3 different answers to this math problem. They couldn't figure out and convince the others which was the right answer, so they were writing to her, official smart person, tell us what the right answer to this problem is, and there's a wager involved right on this. So here was the math problem. And they had on their table a box of 100% bran cereal. They also had a box of 40% bran cereal. This is apparently a real bran cereal family. So they got 2 boxes of bran cereal. One's 100% bran, one's 40% bran. They said, suppose we take a cup of the 100% bran cereal and put it into the bowl, and into the same bowl we put a cup of 40% bran cereal. And here's the math problem. What percent bran cereal or bran do we now have in the bowl? The guy who was writing the letter said his wife was convinced that the right answer was there's 140% bran in the bowl. So he solved his problem by adding the percentages. The brother-in-law said that's ridiculous. The right answer is 60% bran. Because the 100% is more, but you less than it by 40%. So some sort of subtraction operation. The point is that both of those are wrong. The guy who was writing the letter said, I think they're both wrong. I think the answer is, it depends. Did you pour the 100% first or the 40% first? And that's also wrong. So the point is not just about democratic socialism, right, because these people vote, but how the socialists will interpret that. That is to say, look, here we have people who are, put it politely, intellectually deficient. What do advocates of the free society want us to do with those people? Say, hey, you're on your own. Go out into the world and you're going to have to compete with everybody else in this high math and science and technology intensive world. But we've got these people, and these are not the bottom of the barrel, right? These people who, right, they argue about math problems, and they know who to write the letter to, and they care enough about it, right? But they are going to be completely or largely defenseless to be able to make it on their own in a competitive world dealing with smart people. They will be sheep in a world of wolves. These people need protection. And who's going to provide that protection? If it's not going to be that we're going to give them all this self-responsibility and freedom. They need smart people like us. And this is how the university socialists think. I'm a smart person. I'm in university. I know that only 25% of all Americans get through university. I've got the smarts. I've got the knowledge. It really should be people like us who are managing the economy and making sure that the people who are in this category are looked after. Otherwise, out of benevolence, if we don't actually act out of benevolence, these people are not going to make a go of their lives. There's a variation on this, another story. This one goes back to Plato, Gyges. I don't know if you know the myth of Gyges. If you read Plato in your freshman philosophy class, you might have encountered this story. Gyges was a young shepherd boy in a small town in Greece. Very low-paid job. Basically, the job was to take the sheep from the village up into the mountains when the snow's melted, hang out with the sheep all summer while the sheep did sheep things. And then in the winter, you bring the sheep back into the village, and basically you'd be out of a job. So he has a low-paying job, unsocial, and the other thing that becomes important is his love life is nowhere because he's not around women, and when he is around women, he smells like a sheep, so things are not going very well. Legend has it that Gyges is up with the sheep, and he's poking around in some rocks, and he finds a ring. And it's a very fancy gold ring with a jewel on it. And he puts the ring on, and he's playing around with it, beautiful as he turns the ring so that the jewel is facing inwards, and he becomes invisible. And you can turn the ring back out and become visible again. So he now has the magic invisibility ring. And the question then is, what happens next? And Plato's point, and moralists down the centuries who draw on the myth of Gyges will say, I don't need to tell you what happens next. What would you do if you had the magic ring that enabled you to be invisible anytime? And what do you think most people would do? You might think, oh no, I'm a moral, civilized person, so the things I would not use the invisibility ring. But how many of your fellow citizens do you trust not to do those things? So what do we think about human nature when we have the power and the freedom to do whatever we want? There's that freedom word. Give people the freedom to do whatever they want. Bad stuff is going to happen. And that's what happened in the Gyges story. Basically, forget the sheep, I'm out of here. Goes into town, starts stealing whatever he wants. What do people want? They want stuff. Low cost to him. He can have whatever, any woman he wants. He can have her. A wave of rapes occurs. Anybody you want dead? Dead. And so basically Gyges steals and kills his way to the top, becomes the king, after killing the king, marrying the king's wife, and lives the good life because he's got the magic invisibility ring. Now, the free society, right, we say, we're going to trust people with lots of freedom and power to do whatever it is they want. But if we filter that through the myth of Gyges, that starts to sound really stupid, like a recipe for chaos and destruction. And younger socialists, and there's a subspecies here that are a little more authoritarian and paternalistic, will start to say, look, I know that I am a decent person. I am a civilized person, and I really want what's best for society. But I am part of a very small group of people, the vast majority of people. It's not that they don't have the intellectual capacity, although I might doubt that. They do not have the moral chops to be able to handle freedom. Again, we need a kind of paternalistic society that's looking out for the best of the whole and controlling people for their own good and for collective good. Individual freedom, too dangerous, too negative consequentialist. But what we then have here is themes of benevolence and self-responsibility. We don't think people are capable of self-responsibility. They're not smart enough, they're not morally upright enough. And so you freedom people are just out to lunch. And also, out of benevolence then, since most people really aren't able to organize themselves, engage in peaceful relations, intellectually to handle themselves in a very difficult and complicated world, we need benevolent, paternalistic guidance of those people. That ends up being some kind of socialism. Another point, it's a young woman surrounded by some African children, and she's doing a kind of social work pilgrimage. I'm just using her as a representative example. Many young people who find themselves attracted to socialism, it is on the basis of them thinking of themselves when they start to think about the wider world at large as being incredibly lucky. And in one sense, this makes sense. Most of us who were born in the United States, right, or Canada, right, as I was, it was a matter of, I'm going to put it in quotation marks, this is not quite the right word, a matter of luck. I didn't do anything to earn being born into a rich country. I didn't deserve to be born in Toronto with all of the opportunities that were available, all of the things that were given to me by other people. I didn't earn those or deserve those. And how do we process that fact or come up with the language to describe morally how I should evaluate myself given that fact about the world? And one way of reacting to those things is to feel guilt about the fact that you were born into very good circumstances while so many people around the world were not. I didn't deserve to be born where I was. They didn't deserve to be born where they were. I'm living the good life. They're not. And I feel a guilt. So what we have then is, of course, it might be by engaging in certain kind of activist social work, I can assuage my guilt and solve the problem and redistribute wealth and efforts and so forth. But we do have desert themes, and desert themes are all wrapped up in how we understand fairness, how we understand justice, and when we think some injustice or unfairness has occurred, we feel guilt. And a morally healthy reaction is to want to do something to get that guilt out of your system, to make up for it. And that's another thing that feeds into a certain kind of young socialist thinking. So, I've talked you through a bunch of stories here. I'm just pulling out key concepts. These are the ones we just talked about. Security, self-respect, power, corruption, benevolence, self-responsibility, guilt, and desert. How do we think about all of those? And how do we think all about those as they bear on free markets, capitalism, riches, and so forth? All of these are concepts about values, ethics, and morality. These come first in the thinking of young socialists. Now, often we will say things true. The young socialists, they just don't know the history. That's true. They typically don't know the history. But there's also an interesting question about why they don't feel they need to know the history in order nonetheless to be very convinced that they are right in their advocacy of socialism. We will also point out you guys surely are economically illiterate, and that's true. But it's also interesting then to ask the follow-up question, why do they feel they don't need, even though they are pronouncing on issues of business and economics and entrepreneurship, that they don't need to get a lot of economic education in order to be convinced that they are on the side of rightness when it comes to all of those matters. And the point, then, this is my second point, is they prioritize moral thinking over economic thinking. Morality is the trump card. And the morality that they have imbibed, often implicitly, but increasingly explicitly as they come to intellectual maturity, is a different morality from the one that most of us subscribe to. Of course, we have our own disagreements about moral issues, but it is a difference in kind. Very different interpretations of all of these themes. And that's where, if we're really interested in having productive dialogue and making an impact on young socialists, this is where we need to do our work. the entrepreneurship, the economic education, absolutely. But I hope I'm not speaking as a philosopher of ethics, a hammer who sees every problem as a nail. It's not that. But this is the biggest nail, and we need a big hammer in order to be able to deal with this one here. Right. Third point. There's a kind of truism that says if you're not a socialist when you're 20, there's something wrong with your heart. And if you're not a conservative when you're 40, there's something wrong with your head. Okay. The point there is, being a conservative is often being associated with being a little more pragmatic, but also less idealistic, seeing human beings as flawed and fallen creatures, and we can't really expect to improve the world too much. At most, we can get minor incremental changes, right, and so forth. And so that then is to say, if you're going to be a thoughtful, realistic, grown-up person, you have to really get rid of your ideals or park them before you get on with real life. But on the other hand, if you're a young person or an older person of a certain sort, you resist that because you want to marry highest ideals with practicality. You want the world to be a beautiful, successful place, and you think that those ideals are realistically possible. That idealism is especially pronounced within young people who are attracted to socialism, and they're immediately turned off by old fogies as they see them saying, you just need to grow up, cool down, chill out, wait until you're 40, and then you'll really see the way the world works, and so on. That doesn't fly. Now, I want to say that we have this same debate within the broad freedom movement about how optimistic and how pessimistic, how idealistic or how pragmatic we need to be. And the point I would make today is if we are talking to young people, the only argument that's going to work, and I think it's the right argument, is the idealistic argument. I think there's a problem if people lose their youthful idealism for something. I understand all the temptations about being cynical about the process and so forth, but there are a huge number of historical cases in all areas of life of things being very bad and getting better. But it always becomes better because there are idealistic people who think it can become better. Never giving up is essential to our movement. What that implies, and part as a matter of strategy, is that it is important, of course, to focus on the negative and to critique our intellectual and political adversaries and point out flaws in their problem and insist on the history and the terrible track record of socialism and so on. But that is at most 25% of the battle. The most important thing really is emphasizing the positive, emphasizing the alternative and showing how it is a realistic, achievable ideal. So I want to just pair two luminaries in our movement to show how this debate goes, then I'm going to take sides right on this debate. So here's Friedrich Hayek. Hayek is great, important, and he's a brilliant economist, very good on lots of things in political economy and so forth. True confession, I think he's a bit of a disaster when it comes to philosophy, right? But not everybody can do everything well. But here he's making a point about morality and economics. I just want to read you through this here. So here he is, mid-career, reflecting on his intellectual accomplishments and what his contribution is. He says, what I had done had often seemed to me more to point out barriers to further advance on the path chosen by others, than to supply new ideas which open the path to new development. Let's unpack that a little bit. Barriers to further advance on the path chosen by others. Who are the others on Hayek's mind in mid-20th century? It is the socialists of both categories. International socialists, otherwise known as the communists, and the national socialists, as shortened by Nazis. And of course, their Italian cousins, the fascists. And so what Hayek is saying is, My career has been about the socialists having the moral high ground. They're the ones who are saying, we have this new idea. We're going to reshape society, and we can do it, by golly, if we all pull together and implement a socialist program, whatever sort of socialist program we think is appropriate. And Hayek is saying, my contribution is to say it doesn't work, following Mises. Socialist incalculable profit, you don't have profits, this, that, and the other thing. For all sorts of important technical reasons, socialism can't work. So what I am doing then is, I'm not supplying new ideas. I am the balloon pricker. You roll up a nice pretty balloon, I'm going to pop your balloon. Quote continues. Sorry, this is, I know, death by PowerPoint, but Hayek is a Nobel Prize winning genius, so bear with it. If our conclusions on the merits of planning are essentially negative, as to say, socialist planning isn't going to work. We're reaching negative socialism, non-starter as far as economics. But he goes on to say, this is no cause for satisfaction. Nothing could do more to relieve the unmitigated gloom with which the economists today must look at the future of the world than, a little hypothetical here, if it could be shown that there is a way, or a possible, a practical way to overcome planning's abilities. Now let me put that in simpler English and just add a little sarcasm to make the negative point. What Hayek is doing is saying, you know, the socialists are right, but they are the moral idealists. Wouldn't it be wonderful and awesome and special if we could just make socialism work? And I would really love someone to try to find a way to solve all the problems that socialism had, because then we don't have to be so gloomy. But it's just not going to work. Right? I thought about it. I laid out the arguments. And so really, I guess we're stuck with markets. Okay. And that's a problem. And it's a problem for my demographic, because if you make that argument to 20-somethings, you can imagine what the reaction is going to be. So James Buchanan, I think, is healthier on this point. He's no stranger to critiquing alternatives and being cynical and jaded and pessimistic about certain kinds of movements, right, and so forth, but he does make the strategic point, and it's a moral idealistic point, that we really need to emphasize the positive. We have to believe in the rightness of our cause. We have to know why our cause is right. We have to understand why the other guys think that they're on the right track. And in many cases, they are decent people. But here's how we can respond to their legitimate moral concerns. So, we true liberals are failing to save the soul of classical liberalism. The problem lies in presenting the ideal. Classical liberalism cannot secure sufficient public acceptability when its vocal advocates are limited to, does it work, pragmatists. A vision, an ideal is necessary. And he's making a point about human nature. We can all resonate with this to the extent that we're still young at heart. People need something to yearn and struggle for. We want our lives to be meaningful, significant, an adventure, a quest for something. Otherwise, it's just gloom and then you die. If the liberal ideal is not there, there will be a vacuum and other ideas will supplant. That's largely what the history of the 20th century was. Classical liberalism in the doldrums and all of the idealisms coming from other movements. So we need to think about the ideals and what are those. Now, how much time do I have, Abby?
A little over 5 minutes.
A little over 5 minutes, okay. So I'm going to skip over this part that would have taken 10 minutes to go through. You'll have to come back for But the point of this section is going to be, and it's largely rehearsing arguments that I'm sure you have all seen, that when we make the moral case, and we do have a lot of powerful moral arguments, we can show. Freedom is important, happiness is important, peace, the elimination of sexism and racism and so forth, all of these problems that have plagued humankind, the arguments that we can and make on good economic, political governance, and historical grounds and moral grounds, we do have it, but we need to know these arguments, and these are the ones we need to parade first. If you look at the list here, most people who think of themselves as idealistic socialists, they will agree with most of those things on their list. Sometimes they won't, but most of them will agree with most of them. And that's our entry point, but that requires that we are up to speed on the moral issues. And the economic graphs are important, but the eyes glaze over when you talk to young democratic socialists in terms of graphs and bar charts. The data is filtered through a moral lens, and that's where our argument needs to be. Now, I am speaking in my own voice today, but I'm also representing Atlas Society. Hayek, Mises, Friedman, as great as those guys were, they were emphasizing the economic case, and they, to a large extent, tried to stay away from morality and some of the philosophical issues. Buchanan came to seeing the importance of the morality and philosophical issues a little bit later in his career. The bulk of what he is famous for is negative critique of the way governments actually work, the whole public choice model. So Rand is one of those voices that is distinctive in her consistent, obviously vocal and sometimes strident emphasis on saying the case for the free society is most importantly a case for the ethics of the free society. That the ethical battleground is the important one. The historical debates, we can win those, but they will be forgotten in the next generation if we don't have the morality on our side. The disaster of socialism can be demonstrated in practice. It will be forgotten in the next generation, even if the economic arguments are understood, if people are still convinced that socialism is a moral ideal. As long as we are feeling guilty of profits and freedom and competition and so forth, we are morally disarmed. As long as we believe, though, and appropriately, that what really is important is the individual and his or her own dreams and aspirations for their life, and the freedom to live your life on your own terms, respecting the equal right of other people. If we have the moral case for that solid, that will convert the people to our side, especially the young people, and it will make our arguments largely impenetrable. So this is a fictional statement here from the fountainhead. Throughout the centuries, there were men who took first steps down new roads armed with nothing but their own vision. And that's a statement of a moral ideal. And partly she's making a historical point about the people who were the great entrepreneurs, the great artists, the great scientists, the great innovators. What it took for them to do so, often in the face of oppression and social pressures to conform and outright physical beatings and executions. They persevered against that because they believed in the rightness of what they were doing and the appropriateness of them doing so. Now, we resonate with this, and my contention is that young people are still unformed enough to recognize this if it is presented the appropriate way. Because they are starting off on their own lives, and they want to make their own lives. They want to be the ones who do it. They want to go in new directions. They're tired of the old, corrupt, stagnant systems, and they have a vision. And that's important. So, this moral individualism is a capstone statement, but then commend, for those of you who have not read Rand recently, if you're looking for the moral fire and an engagement with the core principles that we are still, 2 generations now later, dealing with in the next generation of young socialists, Rand is a good place to look. All right, I'll stop there, and if I have time, I'll take questions, but I am around all day, so happy to talk further on these issues as well. I didn't see a hand moving back there first. Is there a microphone or just shout it out?
Yeah. We've dealt with Democratic Socialists in Tampa with our institute, and one is the Adam Smith's invisible hand. If you're a
Yes.
Democratic Socialist, it's the government. If you're on the religious right, it's the church. As
Okay.
reasoned thinkers in a libertarian society, how do we start counting that invisible hand? Where some of
Yes.
the things don't fit into the market real well.
Right. Yeah, I think in part it is a psychological point about security, that when a lot of people hear about the market, nobody's in charge. Nobody's making sure that things are going to work out the right way. And so they do want someone who's overseeing, and it might be the church or God, or it might be the state. So if it is in that form, it's a psychological insecurity issue that really has to be addressed at that level. If you're dealing with adults who have a baseline level of insecurity that when they think, you want me to just be totally on my own and I have to have full self-responsibility to make a go of my life, and they cringe, then no economic philosophical arguments really, that becomes a psychotherapy issue. Really. If you're then interested in good parenting and good schooling, then your activist efforts will be needed to be directed at the earlier stages of human life to prepare students for, hey, you are on your own, and you're not, you're a little apprehensive, you're aware of the risk, but like most of us, when we move out of our parents' house, I want to be out, I want to be on my own, and I have this healthy risk tolerance. Where does that come from? Well, a lot of good parenting and good education across the years. So that angle of the problem, I think, has to be dealt with there. But if you're talking about people who have a baseline level of self-confidence, I think that I can make it on my own, so I'm not really looking for Big Daddy to do it. But I'm concerned about other people. I don't think maybe enough people in society are doing it. So then I think you can get good traction using the economic history of showing, well, look at the case of Hong Kong and Singapore and various other places where there are a lot of really uneducated, rather coarse people, but they were able to work it out and become prosperous. And then the way the economists do is to say, well, invisible hand is a metaphor. What do we really mean by that? Unpacking the metaphor. And so it's not just a metaphor, magic wand that we are waving. We can say, no, there's information exchange, and there are signals, and there's voluntary interaction, there's these intermediating institutions that are created, and then people can see, oh, now I understand how there is coordination that occurs without a God or a central plan. So these discussions very quickly have to become tailored to the individual cognitive and psychological context of the person you're dealing with. Your hand next. Yes. Yes. Well, the last part, being assertive and sticking up with yourself, that starts at the beginning, right? Never give up. That one right goes through. No, but you're quite right about the demographics of current university campuses. And I've been talking about younger socialists. Often they'll call themselves democratic socialists, but they're still by and large healthy young people. You're talking about, that's right. So I think you're talking about a smaller subsection of people who are usually a little bit older. They might now be graduate students or seniors, and they really have been indoctrinated in identity politics, social justice warrior, postmodernism, and that whole network of things. And yes, that's an intellectually more sophisticated subgroup, and you do need different strategies for them. Basically, though, the point is going to be, this was the third thing that you mentioned, reasoning and arguing with them. It's too late for them. Just as a point, because they are not interested in reason. They are full-bore activists. Anything is fair and foul, so they're not interested in productive engagement. So different strategies do need to be leveraged for them.
I think that's all the time we have for questions.
Okay, at least officially.
Can we?
Thank you for your attention.